an Egyptian university, and she was telling me she came to Korea last year, and she was amazed by the punctuality. So I think we need to keep this reputation that Korea is a punctual country, and this is we need to do this, you know. So this is why we need to start. So I think we can do that. So thank you so much for coming and for your interest in this session. My name is Momin Gouda. I'm a professor of Middle East Economics at Hankook University Foreign Studies. The title of this session is National Security and International Migration. And I think this is a very interesting title and a very interesting session, hopefully. I mean, we are now witnessing, since I'm coming originally from Egypt, which is, Egypt and Middle East is the hotbed of conflicts and wars. And we are also witnessing what's happening now all over the Levant and Israel and so on. So I think this is a very important session, and we'll be tackling many topics from migration to Syria-Turkey relation to ISIS recruitment and so on. So I think we will have lots of discussion and lots of interesting topics to tackle. So without further ado, let me introduce the presenters and then panelists, and then we will start. So we have with us Associate Professor Shaima Hanafi, Division of International Studies, Hankook University of Foreign Studies. Well, she also happens to be my wife, so she has all the time that she needs to present. You know, I cannot complain. You know. And then we have Professor Robert Lawrence, Assistant Professor of the Department of English at Dongdok Women's University. Very good colleague and friend. We have Dr. Paik Song-Hyun, of Senior Researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies, Hankook University of Foreign Studies, also excellent scholar and a true friend. For the panelists, we have also, I think we will have very interesting discussion here, all true friends and all great colleagues. We have Dr. Noah Dasol, lecturer from Ingenium College at Hankook University of Foreign Studies. We have Dr. Lee Kong-soo, Senior Researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies, Hankook University of Foreign Studies. And finally, and not least, we have Dr. Kim Eun-ji, Principal Researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies at Hankook University of Foreign Studies. So I think we can go for 15-20 minutes for the presentations. I will also follow what you, sir, have did last session. So 5 minutes before you finish, I will raise my hand. This is a very good strategy. And then we will have, I think, 5 minutes for the panelists, and then we can, of course, we have, reply for all the points. And it would be great also if you can open floor for your own remarks and questions. So without further ado, I present to you Associate Professor Shaima Hanafi will present today about recruitment for ISIS.
It's my absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm Shaima Hanafi. I teach development economics at Hankook University of Foreign Studies, and research-wise, I work quantitatively on topics related to development economics, but also political economy, conflict, and terrorism, like the topic that I'm presenting about today. So I start with a very provocative title. I know it's a very controversial topic. So, do civil liberties lead to more terrorism? Very provocative, I know. So let's get started. So, of course, there is a global debate that I'm sure everyone here is well aware of about the trade-off that we have on the one hand between freedom, personal freedom, but also national security. Yeah? So democracies are, of course, very bound by their constitutions and democratic values to protect civil liberties, which is good to have. So I'm not against that whatsoever. But, of course, there is, on the other hand, also the threat of the terrorism. And here is a trade-off of how to combine both with each other. And today I want to shed the light on that topic by also looking into ISIS recruitment, but also people from ISIS that then return back to their home countries, bringing also another level of terroristic threat with them. So just to start with an example of how difficult something like that can be, even with more maybe simpler regulations, when the EU was discussing to introduce a new law that is now passed, the Personal Name Records Directive, which was about asking or actually obliging the airlines to give their the names of the passengers and information on passengers to governments so that they could use that to look into maybe when there is any suspicions, the tracking potential terrorists or investigating and so on. Also, yeah, and the problem was here that actually to get that law to pass, it took more than 5 years of discussion because of the trade-off that there is, of course, also with personal data and data security and so on. Also nowadays, I'm sure we see also that there are a lot of talks about cross-borders control within the Schengen area, which is actually an open area. So in the summer, when there was the football games, the European in Germany, there was the issue of checking the borders again, which are always open and people can pass by, also to because of being afraid of any potential attacks. So what does the literature actually say about that kind of trade-off? So if you look into the literature on democracy on the one hand and terrorism on the other hand, we actually have two different schools of thoughts, and they go pretty much in the opposite direction in terms of the prediction of that relationship. So the strategic school, on the one hand, it actually says that because democratic governments have civil liberties to protect and political freedom to protect, they are rather more limited in how they are able to monitor and to detain terrorism suspects, and because of that, we can expect to have more terroristic attacks. The political access school, on the other hand, says the opposite. It says, well, because there is democracy, there are elections, people can express their opinions, they can vote, so there is then a lower probability that they actually resort to violence or to terrorism in order to address any grievances. Okay, working more on the empirical side, the empirical evidence is rather not conclusive. So not letting one of these schools win over the other. But then there is also another strain of literature that looks into specific features of democracies, like, for example, civil liberties, personal freedom, and check specifically, what about that? What about when the countries have more personal freedom and civil liberties? What kind of effect do we have on democracy? On terrorism? And here, again, the empirical evidence is actually, or the empirical investigation in general is very, very limited. So I'd like to talk today about insights from joint research with Mo Manguda that we did on empirically looking into a specific source of terrorism, ISIS, and look whether democracy and personal freedom in the countries where the foreign fighters originally come from affects whether they joined ISIS, but then also affected whether they returned after a few years back to their home country. Okay, so what do the numbers tell us? So the data, and of course you can imagine that this data is not very easy to collect, so we're happy that we have secondary data here to rely on, that over 40,000 foreigners actually were estimated to have joined ISIS from 110 different countries. And the data also shows that a considerable number of these people actually come from developed countries that also happen to be democracies and enjoy a higher level of personal freedom. For example, Belgium, France, Germany, the UK. So specifically, around 22%, so more than 1/5, of the foreign fighters come from Western Europe. Okay, so in our research, we argue that personal freedom may increase actually the number of the radicals that join ISIS, because when being in free societies, of course, that's something very nice to enjoy and something we should protect. But there is, of course, the negative byproduct here that it allows terrorists to also organize themselves better, freedom of speech, association, movement, and so on, makes it more difficult to be able to prevent terroristic group mobilization. So we argue that this leads to more people from these countries joining ISIS, and this is something that then, this hypothesis is something that then we empirically investigate. Yeah. The second hypothesis that we have has to do with whether then they come back to their home countries or stay in the ISIS territory. So actually, again, we argue that when countries are democracies and have more personal freedom and civil liberties, they experience more returnees, that's what we call them, the foreign fighters that return back to their home countries. So again, we argue that when there is democracy and personal freedom, this decreases the cost of returning back to the home countries, knowing that they are likely to be faced with less harsher consequences than in an authoritarian regime. And also, when they, again, have the civil liberties and the personal freedom, again, they can use that freedom of movement, associations and expressions and so on to actually then also plan for maybe next terroristic attacks if they are just among the society. And that something happened in Brussels 2013 was also on the next slide. 14 in Brussels 2014, the terroristic attack, Paris 2013. Yeah, so it indeed happened. What do the numbers tell us? The numbers tell us that around 5,600 ISIS foreign fighters return back to their home countries. And when it comes to the EU countries, for example, we're looking here that around 30% of those that, to begin with, joined ISIS return back to their home countries. 30%, and in fact, in some countries, the percentage goes up to more than 50%. So at least one half of the people that the foreign fighters that join ISIS return back to their home countries. We're talking here about Finland, about the UK, between 50 and 54%, Denmark 46%, Turkey 40%, Sweden 35%, Norway 33%, Germany 33%. So that's really high figures. So yes, let's get now into the empirical investigation here. So I will simply verbalize what we do here. We look at data from all countries available here, more than 100 countries, so it's a cross-country analysis. We have two different dependent variables for our hypothesis. To test the first hypothesis, we look into the ISIS foreign fighters per million of the population of any countries. And for the second hypothesis of the returnees, we look at the percentage share of the returnees among those that have joined ISIS. That's the estimated the models that we use for our estimations. On the technical side, we do in a test Tobit model here because many data for the dependent variables are left censored because some countries have zero foreign fighters. Yeah, so that's the more appropriate model. Of course, we control for a lot of other variables that also play a role in this relationship, and the data that we use is the average from the years 2011 to 2015 due to the data availability here on those figures. To measure personal freedom, we rely on the Personal Freedom Index, the PFI, which is part of the Human Freedom Index. And what this actually captures, this index, is the rule of law in the countries, the security and safety in the countries as general personal freedom things, but then also specific personal freedoms such as the freedom of movement, the freedom of religion, freedom of association, expression, information, identity, and relationships, all very important aspects of freedom, of course. This index goes from 0, that would be no personal freedom, to 10, which would be the highest score. To measure democracy, we rely on a very minimum kind of measure that looks into electoral democracy, so we're able to distinguish the personal freedom part from democracy. So we have here electoral democracy data from Shaibub et al., also updated by Burns, Cove, and Rode. Okay, so what do our results show? So first, for the first relationship about whether personal freedom affects, whether personal freedom affects the determinants of joining ISIS, we clearly find, as you can see here in the first line, positive and statistically significant effect, also controlling for all other determinants of joining ISIS. And to verbalize that result, what does it tell us exactly? It tells us, based on marginal effects that we need to calculate, because it's a Tobit regression, that a 1-point increase in the personal freedom index that goes from 0 to 10 would increase the number of ISIS foreign fighters by around 7 persons, 6.9 to be specific, per 1 million population. Okay, sounds a bit difficult here. So let's get a very simple example. A country that has a population of 50 million people. What does that mean? Yeah, the 6.9 times 50, so we're talking about 345 more foreign fighters that would join, predicted by the model here, just by 1 unit increase in the personal freedom index. Yeah. Okay, what about the specific features of personal freedom that seem to matter here? We can benefit here from the fact that the index we use for personal freedom can be disaggregated according to several levels of personal freedom. So we can look into what triggers the finding here specifically, and it happens to be rule of law, super important. I mean, who doesn't want rule of law? But a negative byproduct here, there is the increase of terroristic recruitment here, and freedom of movement sounds plausible. It's easier to move and enjoy that freedom also for something brutal as joining a terroristic organization. Okay, when it comes to the determinants of returning, getting back, again, we check here whether personal freedom affects returning back to the home countries. And you can see here in bold also in the first line that the results are positive and highly statistically significant. Again, also controlling for everything else that could matter for returning back, like, for example, is it a developed country to begin with? How far is it to return? The distance to Damascus and other things, religious fractionalization, income inequality, and so on, but also democracy distinguished from personal freedom here. And again, we can quantify here the marginal effects and interpret the result as 1 point increase in the personal freedom index increases the percentage of IS foreign fighters returning back to their home countries by 6.8 percentage points, almost 7 percentage points. Which means that, let's say, if we have, I don't know, maybe 30% returning, if we have 1 point increase in the personal freedom index, those 30 would be 37%. And that's just 1 point increase. Again, something good, more personal freedom, but negative byproduct that we do have here. The democracy effect alone, just to have electoral democracy, is not robust. Same also for joining ISIS. So we, again, look 1 step deeper into, okay, which aspects exactly of personal freedom, and we can see that plenty of aspects from the 7 that we have, namely higher rule of law, security and safety as more general aspects of personal freedom, but also specific freedoms such as freedom of movement, of expression, of information, and of identity seem to drive returning back to the home countries. Okay, so on the empirical side, of course, we also do a lot of robustness checks, sensitivity analysis to make sure that our results are robust to different modifications. Also, we deal more in details with things like, there is an overlap, of course, very strong between democracy and personal freedom. So to really be able to disentangle those effects, so we're confident about those results, that they are highly robust. So again, provocative here. Is freedom in developed countries misused by terrorists for their own unlawful goals? I think this can be concluded here from our empirical findings. Yeah. So our findings, again, to summarize and conclude here, they show, based on the example of foreign fighters joining ISIS, that civil liberties and personal freedom has really the negative byproduct here of increasing the IS recruitment, facilitating it, leading to more IS recruitment, but also leading to more foreign fighters returning back to their home countries. So this, of course, puts the governments around the world in democratic countries with a rule of law and personal freedom that we all cherish, of course, in front of a huge dilemma. So what to do here? And there is definitely no easy solution to do here, but it's a topic that certainly needs to be addressed. And to shed the light on a very important example here when we talk about the returnees. Yeah? So many scholars argue the laws. I don't have a legal background, yeah? But the legal scholars, they argue that the criminal laws in the respective countries, they are not ready for that. They are not ready for this kind of investigation. When the people cross the borders and then maybe they know, okay, that person is coming from ISIS, are they actually, how can that person be prosecuted or the trial? What can they prove that person done or did not done? Yeah? So are the laws ready to do that? Huh? And this is a huge obstacle faced here. So some scholars even argue, even if the persons go to a fair trial on average in those countries with the current laws, they maybe face something between 3 to 5 years in prison. Okay, and then? Maybe I should stop here. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next presenter. We have Assistant Professor Robert Lawrence. He will talk about very interesting topic as well, Syria and Turkey, and lots of skirmishes happening around there. So let's jump into it.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for having me here to talk, and thank you, Dr. Guda, for hosting us. I'm going to try to speak really softly. I have a loud voice, so if I start shouting, please somebody let me know, okay? So we're here today to talk about the security dimensions of Turkey's Syrian refugee policy. And we're going to look at this through a framework of refugee rentierism. So this is a relatively new, did I press the wrong button? It's a relatively new framework in IR theory, but it's gaining a lot of momentum. And this is because its relevance in how, we see massive amounts of migration in the U.S. and in Turkey, of course, has been a hotspot for years. When we look at Turkey in the beginning of the Syrian civil war, they generously accepted refugees on humanitarian and religious grounds. The open door policy of the AKP was, they gave cash allowances. Sometimes they offered housing, education, sometimes TVs, and even air conditioning units, But by the end of 2014, you had 1.5 million people rather than the 15,000 people in 2012. So necessarily, obviously, policies had to change. Things became much more complicated. By 2015, only 10% of the people, of the refugees, were actually living in camps. The rest of them were dispersed throughout the country. So we fast forward to the present, and Turkey has the largest refugee population in the world, looking at around 4 million, 3.2 to 3.6 of whom are Syrian refugees. So, this has become a little bit complicated. As you can see, I can't actually hone in on the map, but the majority of the provinces in the country have less than 1% of their population being Syrian refugees. The larger percentages are near the border, as well as the larger cities in Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. But as we move forward, though, I want to have a look real quickly about how this works with refugee rentierism. So, quick definitions: when nations leverage their host position to extract revenue or political support from target states, and they do this by maintaining displaced people within their borders. What we have is host nations are increasingly realizing their leverage in relationships with these other states. And this has yielded kind of a transactional bilateral approach to dealing with refugees. Unfortunately, this has yielded in many countries, and in Turkey and Syria as well, refugees being shipped around as pawns and the humanitarian concerns kind of ignored. And I think what I'm arguing is that this is creating a security dilemma. Okay, so how this specifically works in Turkey with the EU is that over the years, Turkey has threatened to open up the gates and flood Europe with refugees if it's not given what it wanted, if it's not given its reimbursement for the money it's spent on refugees in Turkey, or it's not getting its political rent, right? Now, I think sometimes when we look at rentier refugee, there's this really big negative connotation to this, as though there's this master plan that Erdogan had and he's been doing this the whole time. I don't believe that's the case, and that's not my argument. Okay, opportunities and geopolitical situations change. So, for example, when we don't just want to look at financial ways of looking at this rent, right? When we look at political rent, in 2016, after the coup, desperate times in Turkey, dangerous times in Turkey, there was a lot of heat coming from the EU. Well, what did he say? He said, if you keep it up, I'll open up the gates. And that rhetoric went down. If that's right or wrong, I'll leave that for another discussion, okay? But it was politically savvy, okay? Likewise, in 2019, he has his own reasons for going into northern Syria and attacking YPG forces there. Well, Europe had a lot to say about that. And he reacted with, if you keep it up, I'll open up the gates. The rhetoric went down, right? So this extraction of rent is strategically wise sometimes. It also looks like in different ways that, Turkey has received approximately 11.5 billion euros since 2011. And this, of course, these programs and projects help host nation citizens and governments, right? For example, 30% of students receiving free transportation are Turks. Turks receive 26% of entrepreneurial training, 70% of small and medium-sized enterprise advisory services, and 80% of financial material assistance in the first half of 2023. And they've received 45% of the jobs created by EU-supported projects. So when we look at how this kind of functions in the Turkey model, I think most scholars that are looking at this see Turkey as a very prime example of it. Now, blackmailing, right, is just the strategy that's the name of the strategy they use when they're saying basically, if you don't compensate us, we're going to open up the gates. We're not keeping the refugees here. It won't be our problem. It'll be your problem too. Okay, now, we're going to look at how this problem with the Syrian refugees has come to be a bit painful for Turkey, and how it's ended up that Turkish hospitality has had its limits, right, like any country would. We're talking about 6% of the population coming in, right? And I'm going to focus on economic issues and social cohesion issues. So what we see is a pattern of Syrian refugees being scapegoated for Turkish economic problems. I can't really zone in on this, but the graph right under economic displays inflation and unemployment, and the green line going up is the number of Syrian refugees with special protection. So I'm not saying that there's a causal relationship between these variables. What I'm saying is that public perception says it is. And we can see this in public opinion polls over and over again. If you see the graph to the right, on the bottom it says, that Syrian refugees increase unemployment because of bringing in cheap labor, and it's 66% of the people who believe that. And the one below that in 2019 and in 2018, there are negative perceptions of Syrians' effect on the economy upwards of 78 and 66%. One of them specifically said Syrian refugees harm the economy. Right? So you see this in surveys over and over again, going back to about 2017 or so. When you look at social cohesion, it's equally, not unanimous necessarily, but the majority is overwhelming. And I can't go in on that chart, unfortunately, but if you could see the lines on that chart, things like, can I marry a citizen? 85% of people disagree with that, okay? Can I be friends? 66%. Would my brother, I wouldn't have a problem if my brother or sister married a Syrian refugee. Okay, so, that's upwards of 76%. So what we're looking at here, when the picture starts crystallizing, is that we see socioeconomically marginalized people, which, similar to what Dr. Hanafi said earlier on today, I'm going to circle back around to how that's going to affect security in the long run. But you have water boiling under the pot, right, under the lid. They're being blamed for economic burdens. There's a lack of social cohesion, and this has resulted in these refugees being scapegoated for the economic problem. They're marginalized. And there's a lot of mutual distrust. Obviously, Syrians are going to pick up on this as well. Okay, this of course yields political vulnerability amongst the incumbent because it's their policies that got them there, and there's a tinderbox for violence. We saw this come to fruition a little bit later, but when we look at how this started to affect elections, right? In 2019, we really start to see the Syrian issue become a big player, and the local elections were lost by the AKP. They lost Izmir, Ankara, and in Istanbul. In the 2023 elections, this became the one thing that I think all parties could actually agree on, was that Syrian refugees need to go back. If you look at the graph on the right, this is public opinion in 2022. 89% of people believe that they need to be sent back. 5% of people believe that they could stay. The verdict is in. The public thinks this way. It's an election, you know, it's a democracy. Leaders have to react to this. Okay, so this became a big problem, or a big issue during the 2023 campaign, and eventually, actually, even Sinan Oğan, the kind of kingmaker in how that ended up, he had a staunchly anti-refugee platform. So what we end up seeing is that this starts boiling over into public discourse, and anti-Syrian rhetoric became fairly normalized, okay? On all parts of the political spectrum, you saw it. And then this summer, we saw it actually boil over. So there was an allegation that a young Syrian woman had been, I think, sexually attacked or sexually harassed in Kayseri in early July or late June. And this ended up erupting into multi-city attacks on Syrian businesses, houses, individuals. It went on 3 nights in Kayseri before the authorities stopped it. But this is a symptom, right? I mean, you don't have mass chaos like that without there just being a lot of water boiling under the lid. So we're starting to crystallize the security problem that exists here, right? When this also causes fear and frustration amongst Syrians in Turkey. And when we start looking at how they're socially marginalized, this, of course, has a negative effect on their ability. If you could have seen the graph before, right? I mean, people don't want to go into business relationships. People don't want to hire Syrian refugees. This means there's a high chance that they're going to end up going into, the informal economy. The informal economy is notorious for violence because that's what governs the informal economy. If you have to get jobs under the table, if you have to get jobs working in illegal sectors, then violence is part and parcel with that trip. So if we take a step back domestically at this point, there's security threats in the form of Turks inciting violence against refugees, with refugees increasingly having to turn to an informal economy and work in a place that's governed by violence. And then you have the potential radicalization of socioeconomically marginalized people. We see this in the literature over and over again. Radicalization and recruiting amongst socially marginalized people is exactly how we got all those foreign fighters into Syria back in 2014. If we go to the international dimensions, I forgot to stop my watch. How am I doing on time, Dr. Guda? Good? Okay. So if we look at the international dimensions here, in between June of 2023 and June of 2024, approximately 140,000 people were deported, Syrian refugees were deported, and an additional 100,000 were repatriated through the voluntary returns program. These voluntary returns, they go through removal centers. There are about 28 or 32 now operating throughout the country. And, it's a little bit tricky how voluntary these voluntary returns are. There are a lot of reports, there are a lot of accusations about this. I don't have any empirical evidence to show me one way or the other. But there are a lot of human rights organizations that are arguing that people are being coerced into signing the forms to go back to Syria against their will. On top of this, right, the anti-Syrian riots that we saw in July, they were reciprocated in Syria. There were Turkish riots that ended up happening in Syria. And, this became pretty violent, actually. They were burning flags. They attacked truck drivers with stones. 7 died in armed skirmishes with border guards at the Syrian-Turkish border. Where do we go from here? Everyone's talked about safe zones that he wants to put in northern Syria to return refugees, but implicit in there is that those safe zones, a lot of them, the proposal is to put them in places where those refugees didn't live before, namely in Kurdish-dominated areas. And that'll likely spark a security issue with Kurdish problems, right? That could expand, that could end up going into Turkey proper as well. Rapprochement with Assad is a very difficult idea too, because one, the complications between the two of them personally. I mean, they went on vacations together a long time ago, but that was a lot's happened since then. But security-wise, you stand to alienate or anger FSA fighters and their affiliates, which could also cause another security issue inside Turkey or on its borders. On top of that, Syria is in no position whatsoever to take on the refugees, and if they were, I don't know that they'd want to. So forcibly putting these people back, pardon me, I'm sorry, that might have been my beard. Forcibly putting everybody back, what are they going to do? They have to do something in Syria, right? They're going to have to find food. So when we think about this from the result of refugee rentierism, I would say that without a comprehensive plan, or a control system to guarantee adherence to the deal and international law, because frankly, the 2016 Turkey-EU deal, both sides haven't done a very good job of implementing what they're supposed to do. Not a lot of people have come back from Greece, and frankly, the EU hasn't dispersed all the funds they said they were going to do. They haven't eased restrictions into Schengen. They haven't really stepped on the gas as far as putting accession talks back into play. So Turkey has every reason in a lot of ways to not hold up its end of the bargain as well, right? And this is why I'm saying that this bilateral transactional approach to doing this has kind of failed, right? And then you have people basically trying to get what they can get in each transaction, and there's not a lot of comprehensive strategy going forward. And what do we have now? We have a bunch of bad decisions, So lastly, and I'll end with this. When we kind of take a step back and look at everything from 40,000 feet, I think that there's something security-wise, when we're talking about Syria, anything to do with Syria, we have to look at it. I think that the international community is sleeping on a big problem. IS is resurgent in Syria. CENTCOM put out information in July showing that it's looking at it like it's going to double its number of attacks this year compared to last year. But if you look at the day-to-day analysis being done by experts, it's actually exponentially more than that. It's over 550 attacks already this year. With everything going on in the region, I think it's being overlooked. And when we put this all together and kind of look at the pieces of the puzzle, one, everything going on in the region is a massive recruitment tool for IS. Okay? Two, you have 50,000 people sitting around in makeshift jails and in camps in northeastern Syria. If there's some sort of incursion, of course, that would disrupt everything there. Three, you have a massive population in Turkey that is socially marginalized, and that makes them low-hanging fruit. I believe that if they end up being sent back without something to do, they're going to have to find ways to live. That makes them prime targets for radicalization and recruitment into extreme groups. So I think from between the domestic unrest that we've seen this summer in Turkey, and the potential problems that we have on the border, given any way of fixing this problem with the Syrian refugees, I think we need to take a step back and really think about how the EU and Turkey need to think about how they're going to approach this and kind of make a more comprehensive strategy rather than going for this transactional win-win in the near sight, but not seeing the far game here. And I'll end with that. I look forward to anything you have to say. This is really very much in the beginning right now. This is a work in progress, so any and everything is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's move on to Dr. Paik Sang-hoon. He's a senior researcher in the Institute of Middle East Studies at Hankook University Foreign Studies. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your brief hush and do your thing introduction. Good morning. I'm Baek Sung-hoon, senior researcher at Institute of Middle East Institutes. And first of all, I would like to address my sincerest gratitude to all the helping hands that made this conference in reality. So I was overwhelmed by the backdrop of our venue, which makes me a bit ashamed, because rather being overwhelmed by the venue, I have to overwhelm the venue with my research, but unfortunately today it won't be that case. But anyway, so today I will be presenting a small part of my second phase of our research projects of 6 years government funded projects, which is ambitiously to defining the neo-diaspora and its repercussion, not only the countries that the refugee or dislocated people are originated, but also the country that has received a refugee after 2010 Arab Spring. And this paper tried to focus on the economic impacts of recipients, countries that had received refugees inflows from Arab Spring affected countries. So we solely focus on the dislocated people that had happened after 2010, because I want to see, because as we all know, we have witnessed all this like fear-mongering, like the Islamophobia or immigration phobia that had happened, and we saw Brexit. I was there doing my PhD in UK. Everybody was rooting for, we have to get out of it. It was no sense, because they are not a part of the Sanguine Agreement, and so like they could control their border, but they kind of like said, oh no. They're coming, so we have to do something. Then Brexit, and boom, it had happened. So this paper tried to focus on the economic impact. So using dynamic panel data analysis, this study investigates the impact of refugee inflows on key economic indicators such as labor force participation, human capital development, and GDP. I use other panel data as well, but I didn't just bring everything here, because like my friends Lawrence said, this is my kind of like initial phase of our research, so I didn't just put everything in. So yes, the background. The mass migration from MENA country continues to be pressing issues. According to United Nations High Commissioner of Refugee, 8 million of people have fled conflict zone over the past decades, and it is not included the recent Palestinian issues. And we witnessed like 500,000 people are trying to flee to Syria from Lebanon. So this number is not counted. It is not yet over, but how they will be returned is becoming another big issue. So while much of the debate focuses on the humanitarian aspect, it is crucial to understand the economic implication and even political index implication of these phenomenon for the host country. Why does this matter? Because host countries in Europe, North America, and parts of Asia are not just grappling with the social integration of these refugees, but also with the political and economic questions that has been arise. So report like Eurobarometer that was out in 2017 have found that significant portion of the European population views migration as a challenge, while others see it as an economic opportunity. For instance, in Germany, only 2% of respondents believe that refugees were positively contributing to the economy. So like other 98 said, no, not all 98, but they said, no, they're not, profiting our country. So it is kind of like leading, this perception are leading a country as a, nationalism and this so-called far-right movement. So there's a phrase that carved deeply into our heart of political scientists. The government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is originally articulated by President Abraham Lincoln in his 1863 Gettysburg Address, and it has become a defining mantra for democratic governance. However, this phrase also reveals democracy's vulnerability to populism. When key actors within the democratic system, such as government, political parties, or civil society organization, Trump or like Obama, you name it, fail to contain the risk of populism. Action justifies as being for the justifies as being for the people can lead to excursion and even violence. And now we are like seeing, and in Korea we have witnessed what had happened in Daegu, the sabotaging the mosque and etc. etc. So populism can be understood through 4 key elements: the people, moral legitimacy, struggle, and vested interest. Most populist movements claim represent the people, particularly to the oppressed, and assert that it is morally right to fight for their rights. And they argue that corrupted and moral deficient vested interests must be overthrown to protect the common citizen, their own citizens. So, that's why I kind of like try to focus. Thus, it is essential to use empirical data to answer the fundamental question: how do refugee influences our society? So this paper, I really try to focus on how this refugee inflows influence the economic structures of host country. That was kind of like my main theme to do the research. So this study aimed to contribute to the debate by providing a quantitative assessment of refugee impacts on economic indicators such as labor participation and GDP. So I'll just jump up everything, and I'm going to go to the research part. So the main research question guiding this study was what are the economic impact of refugee inflow from Arab Spring affected countries on host nation. So the objective of this study are threefold. So to empirically assess the effect of refugee inflow to the labor force participation in host country. 2, to evaluate how refugee movement have influenced the human capital index, reflecting the quality of labor of that host nation. And 3, to analyze the impact of refugees of gross domestic product, GDP, considering both short-term and long-term effect. So the data, refugee data was obtained from UNHCR and covers annual refugee number from Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Libya between 2010 and 2023. Because the reason why I kind of like focus on these 4 countries is because the dislocated people from that countries are actually the refugees dislocated people impacting the whole world. And the economic indicator, these were derived from the World Bank's World Development Indicator, WDI. So we focus on labor force participation, human capital index, and gross domestic the product. And the econometric approach, we use system generalized method at the moment, GMM. And because we use it because the GMM is particularly suitable for dealing with dynamic panel data. So I will just jump on like this thing. So result, the labor force participation. So let's move on the empirical findings. So starting with labor forces participation, our analysis show that refugee inflows have positive and statistically significant effect on the labor forces of host country. The coefficient for the variable representing refugee flow is 0.134 with a p-value less than 0.001. So this means that a 1% increase in the number of refugees led to a 0.13 increase in labor force participation. So refugees are actively contributing to the workforce, either through formal employment or in informal sectors. This contradicts the popular belief that refugees are merely a burden on the labor market. So it's not true. So policy implication, this finding indicates that the host country can benefit from policy that enable refugees to integrate into the labor market more efficiently. Skill training, language courses, and job matching program could further enhance their contribution to the labor market. Human capital impact. So second outcome variable we examined was human capital, measured by human capital index. So here the effect of refugee inflow through the positive, though positive, is smaller compared to the labor force participation. So a 1% increase in refugee inflows is associated with 0.002% increase in human capital index with a p-value below 0.05. So, well, like, while the effect size is modest, this finding is important because it suggests that refugees are contributing positively to the long-term quality of labor in the host country. Many refugees bring diverse skills and experience, and over time, their children benefit from the education system in the host country. So, you know, like a policy implication, more effort are needed to enhance refugee access to education and health service, and etc. And result GDP impact. I mean, finally, we examined the impact of GDP. Refugee inflows have substantial and positive impact on GDP. The coefficient for log refugee is 0.472 with p-value less than 0.001. This suggests that a 1% increase in number of refugees leads to a 0.47 increase in GDP. So, I mean, like, this is the thing. I mean, the reason why I'm doing this is this. I mean, we have to, when we are making a policy, we have to use statistics and the empirical data, not by the perception. But like, I know there are a lot of loopholes, so I'm making a lot of the adjustment. But what I'm saying is, you know, we shouldn't be like especially the political parties. I mean, they shouldn't making so much like fear mongering, like anti-immigrants, Islamic phobias to like confront this kind of diaspora and refugee crisis. Why this is important? Because now we're going to see, because of the Israel, I won't make my criticism in publicly. I mean, I'm not backing Hamas or the Hezbollah, but what I'm saying is the continuation of this like aggressions are making like lots of refugees. I mean, like in Lebanon, like I mean, you name it. If the war like continue on, there will be more refugees, and you know, again, we're gonna fall into the frame saying that refugees incoming, and we have to save our country from this infidels. Like you know, who know there in this influx there might be a like ISIS or the Muslim Ikhwans, Muslim brothers. So yes, we have to work on it, but we have to keep our feet in the ground. And talking about the facts. So after 10 years, a decades of period has been passed. What the Arab refugees has done to the recipient country. I mean, there's not many that negative effect has been done. So like, yes, like positive effect, we have to go do more research on it. But my point is, we have to build a policy, or like a political party have to make their campaign based on the reality and the fact and numbers. That is kind of my goal that I try to do for like second phase of our research project. I think I'm done with my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I should have been prepared the PPT file, but like I'm kind of planning to submit this paper in one of the journals. So like I didn't provide all the detailed numbers. But if you come and ask, I could show you all the detail, because it's open source statistics. So it's there. The numbers are there. So thank you for listening. Thank you.
Well, this is a dream session where presenters are finishing early. This is great. This never happens. So let's move on to the panelists. We have first Dr. No Gasol, a lecturer from Ingenium College at Hankook University of Foreign Studies.
Okay, so my name is Dasolo from the Hankook University of Foreign Studies. And first of all, I'd like to start by thanking the professor for sharing the theoretical background and empirical support of this new approach about the causes of participation in terrorism. Okay, so I remember that what I learned from him when I was a student. He said that terrorist is actually not the madman; they are the very rational people. So but lots of studies have tried to work out why Islamic extremism happens, or their motivation of some participation in the groups. So most of the research have looked at the economic, religious, or political reasons, but this study is new and important because it look at the institutional factor. So the professor's study showed that the improvement in civil rights and freedoms, as well as the rule of law, have a significant positive impact on the dependent variables, namely the number of foreign fighters and the returnees. So what I found especially interesting that the marginal impact is very high compared to other variables. So I think that recently in Korea, we are also seeing the increases in violent and don't ask, don't tell crimes nowadays also in Korea. So I think it is also in line with what Professor presented. So as you mentioned in your presentation, it is really tough to limit civil and personal freedoms in order to reduce the number of people who join the terrorist group or the return from them. So first question is that I'd like to hear your thought on how we can reduce the number of people joining terrorist group while still protecting civil rights and liberties and maintaining the rule of law. For example, increase of the penalties for the participation in terrorist group can reduce the number of some foreign fighters or something like that. Secondly, several variables you set up are statistically very significant. For example, religious fraction. Okay, so it has very big impact. So I am very interested. So I want to hear your views on why religious fraction affect the dependent variable. The third one is the actual technical one. In your regression, there is no R-square. So I'd like to ask about the about value of the R-square. Okay, thank you.
So we move Dr. Lee Kong-soo, senior researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies at Hankook University for Studies. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
A little bit more time because we are
yes.
okay, so we can have more time to do this.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Before I start, first of all, I would like to send my gratitude to the HK National Strategies Research Project Agency, along with Professor Kang Junyoung and Professor Chung Gi-young, and also the professional team for giving us a good opportunity to making presentation and to discuss in this meaningful conference. And thank you, Professor Lawrence, sharing us really like detailed information about what's going on in Turkey these days. And also, I was really impressed by your PPT presentation, this move, how it moves smoothly. As we know, including Turkey, most of these Syrian neighboring countries are suffering from this land-terrorism during these days because of this huge influx. At the first, it was 6.7 million refugees, and as the professor mentioned in this paper, it's they're giving a birth, so the number is growing. So we cannot ignore this point also. So this program actually okay. So I really read this paper with full of concern because I also heard this news about what happened in Kayseri, and the huge revolt happened, and also at the same time at the borderlines always there was problems, people are fighting and there are blood everywhere. But also at the same time different from the Lebanon and Jordan, the entire refugee countries, but Turkey is in the specific location is between the Asia and the Europe. So also at the same time they are trying to enter the EU. So still they're trying. So this is the maybe huge point that Turkey is cannot move forward or the backward. So maybe just in my opinion, they will try to get something forcibly in the backward, but at the same time they cannot reveal what they want really. So as I was researching some news on these refugee issues, and it seems Erdogan government uses the term as a terror to escape from what they are from the people's, especially people's blame. So I was saw that Erdogan, President Erdogan mentioned that that incident, that the uprisings, what happened in Turkey is the terrorist intention to create the chaos in the country, not they just created the chaos. So also at the same time, according to the Human Rights Watch, Turkey government forcibly expelled like 57,000 refugees in the last year, including Syrian refugees. So it means like for me, like I can understand that the government tried to like prevent expected problem by facing refugees to leave the country. So using the secretly national security forces, maybe, but not openly. Also, as this paper said, like these days, is Erdogan government is facing like multi-enemy situation. So actually, Erdogan cannot do it really like more refugee-friendly policy, because like many voters is now going to the opposite parties. Like last 2023, like the election, the result also shows that like how many votes they lost. So in this sense, I would like to have like not questions, but like I have like to give you like 3 questions. Like, so as some sources indicated, this forcible repatriation of some Syrian refugees. So do you expect Erdogan government would use this strategy or policy more strongly if when it encounters larger refugee hatred by locals, to calm them down, like to solve the local problem first? Also at the same time, the second question is like, as the 2016, the European-Turkey deal is about the Syrian refugees only, as far as I understand. So do we have any other problems like similar to the Syrian refugee like phobias that happen to the other refugees in the Turkey region? It's like beside this, but also at the same time, I thought it's connecting to the security dimensions of the Turkey, the local politics. And third, is there any possibility that Turkey used this blackmailing thing, that use the scapegoating the Syrian refugees or refugees to send or free them to the European borders if they are eager to enter the EU, but the EU is not postponing like every time. So maybe the Erdogan can put this card like at the end when he's stuck in the corner. Just do you expect if they can use these security issues to the worldwide, like to not only keep it in the national side? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Then we have Dr. Kim Yeonji, Principal Researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies at Hankook University of Foreign Studies. I have to confess, I have also a soft spot for Dr. Kim Yeonji because 10 years my wife and I came to Korea, and she was the first Korean we met, and she was a great help, at the airport, So you can have all the time you want, okay?
Hi, hello, my name is Kim Eunji, and first of all, thank you for the HK+ National Strategy Research Project Agency to hold this wonderful and meaningful event and to co-host our institute. And also, I'm very happy to participate this session as the member of our institute and with the colleague. So as the Dr. Peng mentioned that our institute is now doing the project funded by the NRF, and the main title is the Arab Spring and the mass migration. So actually all of these, the presenters' presentation was very suitable and meaningful for our project, our research project too. Today, the Dr. Beck and Kim's research about the international refugee flows and the national competitiveness after the Arab Spring is very beneficial to see the impact on the refugee toward the economic the consequences in the host countries of the world, including the Korea maybe. So now most of the countries are negotiate the influx of the migration issue in each country and their influence on the society. So most of the perception on that, actually the perception is negative, most of that, especially toward the refugees from the Arab countries, I think. So most of the refugee, it is very difficult to obtain the position as the refugee in Korea. So maybe this study can support to change the perception of the people who have the fear of the refugee issue. At the end, the Dr. Beck concluded that. So here I brought the simple questions for Dr. Beck's presentation. So first of all, there was various dependent variables to seek these phenomena. Of course, I totally agree with that the labor force and the total GDP can prove the economic consequences on the host country, which the experienced about the influx of the mass refugee. But the HCI, the Human Capital Index, is kind of the number to see that the person who get the education and health guaranteed by their youth era. So somehow seems like not that have the big correlation between two variables, between HCI and refugee issues. So I'd like to know that what is the reason to keep these three dependent variables to see the economic consequences on the host country. And second, the data of the refugee takes the data set from the 4 countries, such as the Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. But the point is that this paper tried to see the refugee after the Arab Spring, but in my opinion, the Iraq already has the mass refugee issue since the 2003 after Iraq war. So maybe the Iraq has the less impact on the Arab Spring, maybe. So I would like to know maybe it's better to see the other countries such as the Tunisia or Yemen. And last question is that in the analyzing the data, of course, it's kind of the empirical research, but was there any significant year or significant points to through the data set to see the boost or to develop the economy in the host country? Because maybe each host country, they now change their the policy toward the refugee from the Arab country. So maybe the number or the influx of the migration by each year maybe has their very differentiation of the issue on that. And the last is kind of the comments on this study. Such as the Egypt, they already, Egyptian government actually support kind of the migration issue. So actually this study is focused on the refugee issue only, but if try to add the point of the migration issue can be support more accurate to the issue, because of course refugee is very kind of the issue that to bring the fear of the society. But on the other hand, there are many migration from Arab countries in each country in the world. But actually, for the people in the society, it's very hard to who is the refugee and who is migrants in from the Arab country. So if further study can try to bring the migration issue too, maybe it is very obvious to see how can be differentiated to the both the country and based on their education and etc. the backgrounds. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I will use my authority and ask only one question each. I already wrote the research with Dr. Hanafi, so I will leave the floor to ask. So I will not ask anymore for you, but I will ask Dr. Lawrence about you said many times blackmailing, like Erdogan is blackmailing and so on. And it seems there is some sort of a bandwagon effect where other leaders from the region, from Middle East, is doing the same. Doing some sort of also blackmailing for the EU and the US and so on. So do you think, what do you think, what's your take on this? I mean, where do you think this is headed? Will this blackmailing will keep going on and on? So I want to know this from you. It would be great to get to know this more. Also, a question for Dr. Peck regarding your empirical analysis. It's very interesting, actually, the work and all this. And I share also what Dr. Kim have just mentioned. I also wrote this, like you, about the countries. You know, choice of countries. Also, I would like to look for maybe Yemen, Tunisia, and so, because we're talking about Arab Spring. But one thing that I am not really 100% sure about is that you treat that refugees will come and work in those countries, which is logical. However, I think many countries have different policies regarding refugee. For instance, in the case of Egypt, it's very hard for refugee to work. So I think what you can do, you can look for ILO website. They have refugee, the sort of permits that they need to get, and you can control for this in your empirical model. One other thing is that refugees they have also different levels of education. So what you can do, you can control for the level of education from each country. They're coming from Egypt versus Syria and so on. And yes, exactly. You can control for this because they're not all the same, all this. So I think this will also enable you to do even further work on this. So I would like to hear from you about the comments from the panelists, and then we'll open the floor to the public.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Nasuno, for your comments. Really appreciate it. Of course, I share the position that, and as an economist anyway, we always look into cost-benefit analysis, and that the terrorists are rational actor in their behavior. They are looking at a cost-benefit analysis equation, even if the benefit includes what they believe happens in the afterlife or whatever. It's part of their, utility function and the equation they are looking at. And what I presented today still fits in this same rational framework by basically seeing that whatever benefit they see actually for themselves, having the benefits or let's say that the merits of the personal freedom decreases their cost of both joining, but then also returning back to the home countries and not facing harsh consequences, and maybe continuing with the terroristic agenda. So it absolutely fits in this rational framework. So thank you for addressing this very important point. Now, to your three questions, let me start with the first one. How can we reduce the numbers of those joining and coming back from ISIS? I understand your question. We're still keeping, of course, the important rule of law and personal freedom and so on. Yes, of course, there are many other relevant variables as well. So I was concentrating on those variables, and as you said, they show high marginal effects here. If you want to keep them as they are, so in sense of thinking of a ceteris paribus equation, of course, all the other variables that are relevant too, if we improve them, we can still reduce those that join ISIS. And here, I would like to bring another study that we just published this week in the Terrorism and Political Violence journal that also builds on the same project, where we look at socioeconomic frustration. And that connects actually with what Dr. Lawrence was talking about. The socioeconomic frustration is a very important determinant of also joining terroristic ISIS. Yeah? And that connects to the unemployment, the youth unemployment, the frustration, and then connecting to many things that we heard about here today in our session. So this is a very important screw to work on, and at least that one is not a controversial one, so there is not a trade-off. So improving of socioeconomic standards and reducing grievance from socioeconomic frustration, I think, is a win-win in everything, and also with refugees topics and so on. So that's another screw that is very important to work on. Okay, but that doesn't mean that we can leave the controversial topic also unaddressed. So what needs to be done here? I'm absolutely not saying we should reduce rule of law or personal freedom, but we should be aware of this trade-off and of this dilemma and of those loopholes that are used. You know, it's intolerant people making use of tolerance laws to their own terroristic benefits. Yeah? And then it means, and this is not where I would be at stake in any way. As I said, I'm not a legal scholar, but we're legal scholars, you know, need to come together and see how can we make sure that these loopholes cannot be misused. Yeah, that, for example, there should be very clear what happens with the returnees, and there should be possible to have a prosecution and to have trials and maybe, you know, update the laws with this newer challenge that maybe nobody thought of 20 years ago. Yeah? So that needs to be addressed, and here with the quantitative results we can, you know, spot the light on that this is a big issue and it needs to be addressed, and, you know, just pushing the topic or saying, oh, we will not take them back or whatever, this will not solve the issue. So that definitely needs to be addressed. Okay, your second question regarding the religious fractionalization and why it affects here the terroristic, joining the terroristic organization. Well, I would say very straightforward. Religious fractionalization leads to more religious radicalization. Yeah? When there is a lot of religious groups in the country, there is maybe already this stress in the country could increase the religious grievance of people, yeah, and could be fueling the religious radicalization. I would be yet careful of interpreting directly the coefficients out of the table, as these are not the marginal effects. So marginal effects would still need to be calculated, but you're right, this variable was highly significant, so it's very important. The last question on the R-squared, well, Tobit regressions, unlike the OLS regressions, for example, they don't have the R-squared. There is the pseudo R-squared that some researchers look into, but they also need to be taken with caution. So that's why it's not here. Thank you very much.
All right. Pardon me. Thank you, Dr. Young-Soo, for your questions and your comments today. They're very helpful. And let me see if I can answer a few of them. Let me know if I didn't get the questions correct. So the first one: will Erdogan continue to use forcible removals if there's continued social unrest? Right. I guess I would say I hope not, but nothing's really stopping him. And this is part of the problem with this transactional approach to refugee rentierism. You know, right now, at the end of the day, you've seen in the graphs how unpopular this situation is amongst the electorate. And he's in the margin of errors in his elections right now. You know, the AKP has had a tough time in some local elections. This past 2023, Erdogan maintained control of the presidency, but it wasn't exactly an all-out victory either. So, you know, in reality, you know, the coalition with the MHP, the Nationalist Party in Turkey, makes this a little bit complicated, right? Obviously, nationalist voters are at the top of the list of people who wanted to get rid of the Syrian refugees. You know, we see this even the MHP split, and you had the EU party, the Good Party, that came about a few years ago. So will he or won't he? I mean, look, if there's one thing I know about studying Erdogan for 15 years or so, is that there may not be a better political survival in elections in the world. It's not like Vladimir Putin. I mean, he does have to deal with actual elections, okay? I would never second guess him as far as figuring out a way that's good enough for the electorate to stay in power, because he always has. Whenever I've thought, like, I don't know if he's going to get back from this, he always does it. And I mean, that's speaking to his brilliance, frankly. I mean, like him, don't like him, I'm not really concerned with that. Just as someone who watches him through elections, he figures out a way to make it happen. And all it takes is one little slip up from the opposition, and he knows very well how to exploit it. And that's what happened in 2023. If you looked at all the polling data going up into to the election, everybody thought he was done, and then he figured it out. So will he continue to do this forcible removal? I think predicting Erdogan kind of, it ages like milk a little bit better than wine. I stopped doing that years ago. That guy figures out a way to do things, and that's just how he has. I mean, that's the grassroots of the AKP. If you look at them, they always have their ear to the ground. So they figure out ways. I'm not real sure what he'll do. As far as other refugees not having a particularly fun time, yes, I'd say the Afghans in particular. When you look at a lot of the survey data, you see especially cultural cohesion problems with the Afghani refugees. There are a lot of Afghani refugees, especially after the U.S. withdrawal of Afghanistan, that tragedy that landed a lot of Afghani refugees on Turkey's doorstep, and they have not had a good time of it. It's a massive cultural assimilation. Anybody who's been to Istiklal Street in Istanbul knows that that's a far cry from Kabul. So it's a big jump, and there have been a lot of problems with social cohesion there. Will Turkey leverage refugees in the UN accession talks? What I would say, again, predicting, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with it necessarily, but he might. He has before. This has been he's leveraged. In 2020, he leveraged he basically made a migration crisis at the Greek border. However, I don't think that seems to be the plan right now. Hakan Fidan, the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, if you will, he's a very capable individual. I watched an interview and saw some work that he did recently talking about the continuation of Turkey's extension plan, and it doesn't at all seem to be like he's trying to leverage, right now anyway, it doesn't seem like he's trying to leverage refugees. It seems like he's taking a much more, not gentle approach necessarily, but a smoother approach to things that's not as combative, right? He's a very capable individual, and I'm sure that they have something a little bit different planned. I don't think they resort to that unless they have to. And then it's kind of a trump card in their back pocket as of right now. Dr. Guda, bandwagoning on the blackmailing issue. There's a famous, in the literature, there's this one quote from Jordan that ends up showing up in like 5 or 6 different papers about how they said we should have done it like the Turks did. Like we should have blackmailed Europe like the Turks did. And it's kind of funny, but it's also comical in a different way. And I think this may go to what your paper was about earlier on today. I haven't read it yet, but in the brief discussion that I heard you talk about, Jordan doesn't have the same juice that Turkey does. It's a different game that they're playing. One, geographically, right? I mean, they share a border with the EU, right? 2, I mean, they play a different part in world politics. They're selling drones all over the place. They're hedging in Ukraine, right? They're NATO members. They filled that gap in the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict. They're players in the Eastern Med. They got gas coming in from the Black Sea. They're trying to become an energy hub, right? So they have a totally different hand to play, I think, in power politics than some of these other countries that may want to do that can. So will it happen? I don't really know, but I don't think that those other countries that want to bandwagon have the same political capacity that Turkey does, nor do they have the same leadership, I'd say, with Erdogan's ability to handle himself on the international stage. That's why I'd leave it there.
Thank you. My answer will be very short. Yeah, I mean, what do we call the criticism that kind of like brought out? It's all like right. So I'll try to make my adjustment. And the reason why I kind of like choose 3 variables is because I mean I put every variable's in it, but like the reason why I put like 3 of them is because it's just number. So like I just want to just briefly show, number tells you that it's not going the other direction. Whether it is it didn't give that big the influence. And I mean you talked about like why we focus on refugees. Yeah, I mean this is the thing. I mean like. The foreign laborers. There are a lot of, in history, the migration from Middle East to the other countries are kind of like written in history. Even it is written in Bible as well. So like it has long history. So I just want to focus on the refugee issues. And the refugee are like kind of like what do we call? They're categorized by the UN, which is the high authority. So I just really focus on how the refugees crisis affects the other countries' issues. So my policy was taking Yemen out, but like even if we put Yemen in. Pretty much the result will be the same. And this is the thing. The why we choose this 5 countries is because I really want to focus on Arab Spring issues. So like the refugees that had occurred after the Arab Spring. And, like foreign laborers and the thing, I mean, they get legitimately their visas and everything. So we shouldn't be like worrying about but I want to focus as what are the impact of the refugee. Well, I mean, like even in South Korea, we are not like what you have said, we are not getting a lot of refugees because we are worried about all this like side effects. So instead of getting refugee, we kind of make so-called like humanitarian resident permit holders or like dislocated people. I mean, we try not to use refugee because we don't want all the refugees coming into our country. So we are kind of like doing our best to prevent them. So like my point is this. I mean, the reason why I want to see the refugees, how refugees impacting the whole world. So I just see the reason why I choose that country it is because those are the country that kind of like not exported, I mean like created the refugees after the Arab Spring, and what were the economic impact of that countries. I want to show it with the numbers, so I just get rid of all the indexes, but I just focus on the valuable that could be shown with the numbers. That's why I did it. But like after my research is done, I will gonna come out with you. And thank you for your advice on the education and etc. I will gonna put it to make adjustments there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think we did a great job with the timing. I suggest we finish here. If you have comments, right? Perfect. Huh? If you have comments, suggestions, we will be here together for lunch, hopefully. So please talk to us and talk to the people here, and wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you.